So we've talked about how to conduct a risk assessment to identify any risks that might be present related to assets that have value to the organization. What we need to do is consider the impact that those realized threats could have against those assets and then prepare accordingly for that. That's where a business impact analysis, or a BIA, comes in as being very relevant. It allows us to prioritize mission-critical processes. Now, what does that mean? That could be a specific business process tied to an IT system or a collection of systems, and of course, tied to the resultant data. Maybe that's what we would prioritize as being the biggest impact to an organization, is maybe a sensitive data breach of some kind, which we hear about all the time in the media. So we're thinking about the impact of negative incidents against things like payment processing systems, banking and financial institutions, customer financial records, patient medical records. Naturally, all of that is very sensitive and is not meant for everybody to see. So we need to find out what we can do with a business impact analysis to help protect those types of assets. Now, part of this, and it comes full circle, is assessing risk. You need to be able to assess a risk before you can determine what the impact of that realized threat would be. And that means identifying things like sensitive data. You might have a lot of data, whether it's on premises or in the cloud, but where is the data that might be covered by certain data privacy, security standards, laws, and regulations? We have to know where that data is. We have to identify things like single points of failure. For example, if we have a mission-critical app that needs to be kept running for internal employees, having it run on one virtual machine doesn't make it highly available. But having it run behind a load balancer with multiple virtual machines does make it highly available. That would be another thing that we consider. What's the impact of an app being down for a period of time? So then we can identify any security controls that can be put in place to reduce or minimize the impact of a negative incident against those business assets. So business impact, what can be the negative impact if we have realized threats? One is financial. It could be fines that are levied by some kind of governing body because certain security practices were not put in place within an organization. Another financial impact could be a loss of contracts due to a loss of confidence in an organization being able to control its own IT systems and securing them appropriately. Nobody's going to want to do business with someone that keeps getting hacked over and over and over again. There's reputation loss. What does it do to the general public if we sell public services or products when we keep getting hacked? Or what does it do for shareholder confidence if we're a publicly traded company that never seems to be able to secure things correctly? Then, of course, we have data loss. That would be another negative impact of a potential realized threat because the asset would be the data. If that data goes into the hands of unauthorized users, that could cause a lot of problems. First of all, we might be required by law to notify the public or the affected customers of the data breach. And we might have to escalate it further, for example, to local law enforcement or maybe in the United States to the FBI to handle it further and look into the situation, into the security breach. Data exfiltration is a big problem. It means that we've got sensitive data that is leaving the organization and somehow falls into the hands of unauthorized users, whether because we've got malicious inside users, because of malware, or some other type of realized threat that made that data available where it shouldn't have been. Now let's take a look at an example of a big hack that happened back in 2014. Here on Wikipedia, I've searched up the JP Morgan Chase data breach many years ago. The idea here is the number of accounts that were compromised. So here there's a note in Wikipedia about approximately 83 million customer accounts that were compromised. Now, by going further into this, we'll be able to learn a bit more about what happened and what was done to rectify the situation. But the point here is you can imagine with JP Morgan Chase at the time, there was a loss of shareholder confidence, a loss of confidence from perhaps business partners, and certainly from customers. There is some terminology that you need to be aware of for the Security Plus exam as it relates to business impact. One of which is dealing with failed components. So failed components meaning software components, or in some cases, physical components like a hard disk in a server. So the mean time between failures, or the MTBF, means that we're looking at the average time that passes between repairable component failures. The operative word there is repairable. If something happens to that component, we can repair it. Now, that would not be a hard disk. That would definitely be something in the realm of a software component that might have a flaw that can be fixed. The mean time to failure, or the MTTF, is similar to the mean time between failures, but the difference is that it applies to non-repairable components. So imagine that we've got things, as we've mentioned, like hard disks. You can't really repair a physically damaged hard disk, or it's very difficult to do that. No one's going to do that. Or what if you have a failed network switch, or a failed router, or a fried motherboard? When those things fail, we usually just replace them. So the MTTF is really a measure of time until we might experience that type of failure for a non-repairable component. Then we have the mean time to repair, the MTTR. This is the amount of time that it would take to repair a failed component, if that component, in fact, can be repaired as opposed to being replaced. Now, when you take the Security Plus exam, beware that you need to understand the difference between each of these three terms. So another part of a business impact analysis when it comes to data is knowing, where's the data? Is it in the cloud? Has it been replicated in the cloud to different regions? Is it on premises? Is it in all of those locations? We have to know where our data is. Specifically, we need to classify our data so we know what's sensitive. What is sensitive health information? What is financial information? If you don't know that, and that's changing daily, of course, by the way, then how could you possibly protect what you don't know about? You need to know about this. So a privacy threshold assessment, or a PTA, is one of the first things that you will do when you want to make sure you understand the nature of the sensitive data that you have and any laws or regulations that apply. You have to know about that before you can take steps to protect it. Now, the other thing we have to think about is the impact on sensitive data if it is exfiltrated, if it's disclosed to unauthorized parties. So in order to determine exactly what that impact would be, we can conduct what's called a Privacy Impact Assessment, or a PIA. Now, normally, we need to be compliant with laws and regulations to protect the data. Nothing is 100% perfect all of the time. It just doesn't exist. What if that sensitive data gets breached? What will the impact be, and how will we respond? Two important terms related to business impact analysis are the recovery point objective, the RPO, and the recovery time objective, or the RTO. The RPO relates to the maximum tolerable amount of data loss. So for example, if we can tolerate up to 1 hour of data being lost forever, we cannot get it back, then that means our RPO is 1 hour. That also plays into your backup frequency. How often should you take backups? Well, if your RPO is 1 hour, you need to be taking backups at least once every hour. Then we've got the recovery time objective, or the RTO. This one relates to the maximum amount of downtime that we can tolerate, let's say for an e-commerce system. So perhaps the RTO is 2 hours. We can tolerate that system being down for 2 hours, but after that, it has major negative consequences for the organization. So we have to get that system up and running to a functional state. So the RTO then of 2 hours means that our incident response plan related to that server must make sure that we get it back up and running within that stated 2 hours. So a business impact analysis then encompasses looking at hardware, software components, thinking about how often we back things up, and an incident response plan to make sure we get failed systems up and running in a tolerable amount of time.